Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ATARC's 2021 Cybersecurity Virtual Summit. For those of you who don't know, my name is Tom Suter. I am the ATARC CEO and founder, and ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives, including cybersecurity. And I'd like to thank our partners over at SailPoint, Tripwire, Venafi, Microfocus, and GitLab. These are all great partners of ATARC. They participate in our many forums and working groups and fantastic partnership that we have. And I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day. Welcome 2021, couldn't happen soon enough. Today we'll have a full day of action-packed panels, all surrounding cybersecurity in the federal space. We hope you enjoy this day. Before we begin, I do have to make an announcement. We have this SolarWinds highly sophisticated manual supply chain attack. We can't talk about that. The federal government is really working on this issue. It's like talking about the crime scene as the crime just happened. So we can't talk about it. I will say I've been in many meetings, and it's the number one thing on the topic of anybody in the CIO shop. So we can't specifically talk about it. And I don't want to get anybody in trouble as we're doing this. So lots of other questions to ask, but we'll try to stay away from that topic. So up first, we're going to kick off 2021 right. We're going to have Kevin Cox, and Kevin is the program manager of the CDM program at Department of Homeland Security over at Ciso. And Kevin, if you can come on, are we going to get video today? There we go.
Yes, sir.
Are you in the office today?
I am.
Yeah.
Had a series of meetings to attend.
Yeah. So it's kind of starting to get back to normal maybe, huh?
To some extent, but also tied into some of the activities you talked about as well.
Yes, that we won't go into further. And Kevin, really, it's been an interesting year to say the least, and love to hear about how you've adapted the program to last year, and definitely what's ahead for us in 2021. So thank you for coming today, and look forward to your keynote.
You bet. Very good. Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the team. And good afternoon, everybody. Once again, my name is Kevin Cox. I'm the program manager for the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation program. And what I want to talk today to you all about is not just CDM, but really from a CISO perspective and cybersecurity division perspective within CISA, one cybersecurity division being one of the divisions within CISA. Talking about how we're approaching helping make the federal government networks more resilient. As Tom had indicated, I won't dive directly into the details of some of the latest incidents, but certainly around that and getting lessons learned from that and building off of best practices in industry, we want to continue to build that resilience within the federal networks and really help protect our all of the data that represents our different personal identifiable information, the different mission data for the different agencies, et cetera. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And let me make sure the slides are brought up here. And if not, I'll just talk through them. I'm not seeing, well, let me just walk through then, and I'll make sure the slide deck that we'll be presenting is available to all of you as participants. So we'll make sure you get those slides. But I'm going to walk through the slide deck here just to give you a better sense of what CISA's mission is, what we're doing within cybersecurity division, and really what the focal points for CDM are going to be within this fiscal year FY21. So CISA is the nation's risk advisor. We work to ensure protection of the federal networks, work to bring about comprehensive cyber protection, both at the federal level, but also with our partners within the states, localities, tribes, and territories, as well as within industry. Also supporting infrastructure resilience and in the field operations out across the country in support of the critical infrastructure efforts. And then also supporting emergency communications, a key mission area for CISA. As mentioned, within CISA, there are a number of divisions. So going on to the next slide there, very good. Good, I'm glad all of you can see the slides here. So within CISA, there are multiple divisions, cybersecurity division being one of them. So the mission priorities for us within cybersecurity division are to build out cyber defense operations within the agencies across the federal.gov, but also, as mentioned, working to support our broader partners outside of the federal space. Also looking to build capacity, and that's going to be one of the topics I address today, across the federal.gov, the federal civilian networks, just to make sure that they have the right solutions in place, the right intelligence, informing them of threats to their networks, to their data, et cetera. Working to support critical infrastructure, building capacity there, building capacity with the states, the localities, the tribes, and the territories, the SLTT. And then finally, working to ensure a stronger, more resilient cybersecurity ecosystem for all of our partners, and working to, at the end of the day, keep the adversary out as much as possible, but also if there is an incident, that we can detect that incident as quickly as possible, so that we can protect our data and recover back to normal so we can support our various mission areas. Go on to the next slide. So capacity building is a key area for us. We want to make sure that at the federal.gov level that we're getting them the tools, the technologies, the processes to keep up with the adversary, getting the visibility across their networks, getting them the assistance around governance, training, and just really making sure that the delivery of solution sets can be sustained within the agencies and ultimately provide value to them. So we're working in a number of different ways to do that. One of the programs the program I oversee, and one of the many programs within the cybersecurity division is the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program. So we want to work to help agencies identify gaps that they have in key areas and fill those gaps, get the visibility they need on the network, the visibility they need of their user base, of their privileged users, so that they can better protect their networks and make sure that everything is properly managed and overseen over time to really build resilience in the networks. Go on to the next slide. So many of you may be familiar with this. This just gives you an overview of the focal points for the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, the CDM program. The wrapper around all of this is building out the dashboard infrastructure, getting the new agency dashboard deployed to each agency. That agency dashboard is using the Elasticsearch capability and the various tools associated with Elasticsearch. We also are deploying the federal dashboard. So we're working to get data feeds, data summaries up from the agencies to better help federal leadership to get a better understanding of what the overall federal landscape looks like, what the specific vulnerabilities are out on the networks that need to be addressed, and really be able to target to help fix the worst problems first across all of the networks. The data coming to the dashboard comes from one of four capability areas. The first one that we've been working with and are continuing to work to fill the remaining gaps is asset management, helping agencies understand what's connected to their network, understanding each thing on their network that is IP addressable. We also are working to help agencies understand who's on their network, who all of their credentialed users are, and then really making sure that perhaps more importantly, they understand who their privileged users are and where their privileged accounts are, so that they can detect in the event of some type of adversarial action, any type of escalation of privileges, look for anomalies around identity to, again, build that resilience in their networks. The third capability, network security management, is helping agencies get a better understanding of the activities on their network, how overall their network is protected, also not just their immediate on-prem network, but also as more and more agencies go out to the cloud, helping them understand what data, what systems they have out in the cloud, and being able to get that full visibility for the agencies so that they know what protections they have in place and where some of their gaps remain, so that we can help support filling those gaps and getting the full picture of all of their important mission data. Finally, this one's more targeted specifically to high value assets. We want to work with the high value asset program within CISA to support all of the high value asset system owners throughout the agencies to make sure that they have the right protections in place for the critical data in their HVAs. And we've been working a pilot on that since last year, and that will continue. And continuing to work with agencies to identify future high value assets that we'll work with to bring about additional data protections in those environments. We'll move on to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about the architecture where we deploy an agency dashboard out to each agency and then feed the data up to a single federal dashboard that contains summarized data. We want to make sure that the agencies have the visibility across their environment with object level data, detailed level data to help manage their environment rather than having to go tool to tool. They can utilize their dashboard. And then with the summary data at the federal level, it allows the federal leadership to run reports to look at what particular operating systems are in use within the federal space, where critical vulnerabilities are, some misconfigurations, et cetera. All of that data comes from what we call the A layer. So this is the ABCD model where the data is coming up from the sensors and scanners. It gets integrated through the B layer, the data integration layer, and then fed up at the object level to the agency dashboard, and then summarized up to the federal dashboard. So this diagram represents that overall data flow and the overall stack of tools that feed up into the reporting for the dashboards. Move on to the next slide. So in terms of where we've come from FY20, as we're now in FY21, we supported the agencies during the transition to a more remote work posture, given the pandemic. In some cases, for a certain set of agencies, we were able to accelerate some CDM deployments to assist their network folks and security folks to get additional protections in place, additional visibility, as there was a ramp up in some malicious activity around some of the agencies we worked with, and so we wanted to work to get those protections out as quickly as possible and have visibility out as quickly as possible as well. We'll continue to have that flexibility based on future needs, future funding availability within our CDM Defend task orders. And so we want to continue to be available to help the agencies as much as we can in really times of need to help protect their networks and their data. From a dashboard perspective, I mentioned we're deploying the new Elasticsearch dashboard. It gives us a lot more flexibility, scalability, better performance than our original dashboard. We now have the new agency dashboard deployed at 4 agencies. We have the federal dashboard in place this quarter. We're going to be bringing up data from those 4 agencies and continuing to roll out the agency dashboard to the remaining agencies. And so that really changes the equation for us. We'll have much greater visibility. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the effort to ensure data quality. That data quality piece is really critical in order to operationalize the data and bring the value to the agencies for the reports that they'll run in their dashboard. So we'll go on to that next slide. So we work closely with the agencies, work closely with the system integrators to build out our data quality management plan. This is a series of critical checks that we do in terms of data feeding up from the sensors and scanners, up through the data integration layer, up to the dashboards, just making sure that the view that the agencies see in the agency dashboard and that we see at the federal level provide accurate reflections of what things look like down on the ground, that we want to have an accurate picture of what the system administrators are doing, security administrators, so that their leadership and federal leadership feels confident in the use of the data. We can also use the data to operationalize to start to measure security posture across federal .gov. That's where the agency-wide adaptive risk enumeration algorithm comes in, AWARE. And it's the first step towards really getting a better way to measure risk, starting out really focused on security posture, looking at vulnerability management, configuration management. And so we'll continue to mature that out over the coming years. Go on to the next slide. This really wraps up the presentation. So we started out FY21 with the idea that we're going to continue to lean in on the dashboard rollout, continue to lean in on getting the asset management gap fills completed, finishing out some of the identity-related work with credential management, in ensuring that data quality is in place and start to operationalize the CDM data through the AWARE algorithm. We continue to have efforts underway, some pilot efforts with on the network security management side in regards to cloud, network access control. We have some pilot efforts around data protection management. We want to continue to grow those out over the coming years. And then likewise continue to support some new efforts on the mobile side, integrating with the agency mobile device management systems or their enterprise mobility management systems, bring that data up for their visibility and understanding, and then really help agencies get a better handle of everything that they have out in the cloud. With the latest incident, although we can't get into the details, we have found that the efforts that we have underway are important to continue to build out the resilience within the agency networks, to really help them understand everything in their networks, be able to run reports on that. But one of the things we're also going to be looking at over time, particularly on the network security management side, is looking at the right tools and technologies to help agencies better protect their networks, but also help identify anomalous behavior, any activity on the network that doesn't align with normal use of the network, so that we can more quickly identify incidents and get in front of them. And at the end of the day, our goal is to try to prevent incidents, but we always have to be prepared and be able to respond as quickly as possible to ensure if an incident does occur that the damage is minimized and that we can continue to work to get the adversary out and continue on with normal business. So those are some of the things we're going to be looking at over the coming year, this year and next. But just to give you a sense of where things are headed, I wanted to throw that in there. So with that, I'll hand the floor back to Tom. And once again, I appreciate everybody's time today, and I wish you well. I hope you enjoy the upcoming sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I guess can we send these slides out to our attendees? Would that be okay?
You sure can. Yes, indeed.
Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, my friend. And I look forward to seeing you again in person.
Indeed.
I miss the old days of getting in person, but I think we're definitely trending in the right direction there. Thank you so much.
Indeed. You bet. Thanks, Tom.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. That was good to get Kevin on. It's always a treat to hear what he has to say. So much of cybersecurity, especially on the civilian side, kind of runs through that program. So that's fantastic. I would like to introduce our first emerging technology talk of the day. And we have Frank Bergoglio, who's global public sector strategist over at SailPoint. And Frank, can we get you on with the video? There you are. How are you doing today, Frank?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tom. As this is an honor to be here today, especially to follow Kevin. So I look forward to it.
Yeah, I look forward to your talk. Are you actually physically at headquarters, or is that kind of like a virtual thing?
It's a Zoom background. I'm in Annapolis, Maryland.
Okay, great stuff. Well, I look forward to your talk.
So I believe everyone should be able to see my presentation, and thank you very much for attending. This is going to be a real quick version of this presentation. But we're going to look at, some of the drivers and impact of cybersecurity challenges, how identity-centric security is key to enabling this digital transformation and zero trust, all while maintaining a compliant and secure boundary for all users, applications, systems, and data. As Kevin just, talked about, that who's on the network piece of CDM is very critical. Because what we're seeing today in the past, couple of years, these statistics, are from the last couple of years, but what we're seeing in this new modern era of digital transformation, IT modernization, and this new era in the midst of this global pandemic, we have this accelerated shift, and we're opening our borders to communities of users beyond the traditional user. But really what, in the end, we're talking about more risk, and the impact is quite staggering. They don't present, a pretty picture either. Executives expect to be breached. Well, this can be good that they have that awareness, but it tells us as cyber practitioners, we need to be doing things better. It tells us we need to be protecting the keys to the kingdom and have more oversight of how access controls are configured and enforced. And that aligns very well with the goals of the CDM program, actually. We're getting that visibility, and we're actually using the SailPoint platform in a lot of places to build that master user record to understand the relationship of identity and context. And we're going to talk a little bit more about context later, but it's all about data quality as well. So, when we look at, what's happening, I mentioned the risk that's coming in many forms, but it's this misconfiguration and lack of visibility, lack of automation, and inconsistent process that we see in general, whether we're managing cloud or on-premise platforms and resources. Really what we're talking about is overexposure, stale and toxic access. And that's exactly what CDM is trying to do, right? With bringing in the privileged users. But that's only addressing one small part of the environment. And that's where we need to take a broader identity-centric approach. It grows beyond just the privileged user. We're all privileged in my humble opinion. But our environment has grown in complexity. We have more users, more applications, more systems, platforms, infrastructure. The cyber threat is coming in many forms. Threat actors may already be within the environment. And we really need to move to a model where we're protecting the various tools that are being used against us. And most importantly, it's the identity that's being used against us. You've probably heard this a lot. It's becoming a new catchphrase, but the perimeter is dissolving, and the identity is becoming the new perimeter. We hear a lot about zero trust these days, right? Let's be honest. It's an overloaded buzzword, but really what we're talking about is identity-defined security or identity-centric security. We're talking about data-centric security. Those two things combined, we can protect the environment. So this concept is not new. And zero trust requires this identity-centric approach. And you see the building blocks. Really, I highlighted them in yellow in the middle, and it's context, risk, policy, and workflow. All those things that enable our integration with the security ecosystem, the mitigation part, but the prevention, the detection, and the ease of use part on the top. So identity governance builds that model of access and enables things like directory services and all types of access management and privileged access management. This diagram, I picked from the Identity Security Alliance. Doesn't include credentialing, but I think in federal government, we'd be remiss if we did not mention how important credentials were. But in order to shift away from our perimeter-based security with layered on, controls, identity has just become absolutely critical. So, how do we get there? We need to look at our identity strategy, and it's taking it, that first step of understanding what is on the network or who is on the network, and performing that risk assessment, understanding the compliance impact, whether it's protection of privacy data or protection of the keys to the kingdom. We need to do that. Credential management. We have multiple types of credential. We need to ensure that all folks are using the right level of credential, which brings in, the tools for endpoint and infrastructure security. And how are we doing the analytics? Kevin mentioned the CDM analytics, the identity solutions, and I say solutions, not just identity governance. All those analytics tools that go along with those help us paint that bigger picture and allow us to do continuous evaluation of access. The identity governance model itself builds the story, builds the picture of what access should look like, and enforces that through roles and specific policies and things like that, and access control rules. And what we can do then is detect the anomalies. But, most importantly, it provides, our strategy includes this lifecycle automation, so we can grant self-service access or automate removals through access certifications and access reviews, or when something goes wrong, that alerting and reporting framework. So it's all about visibility. And, I think, the driver of CDM and how we're moving forward with building the identity and the picture of who's on the network and what they have access to is extremely critical. So I'm going to leave you with one thought. It's time to rethink how we're doing security, and identity's never been so strategically important. Love to chat more with y'all about this, but Tom, back to you.
Oh, thank you, Frank. And I think what we've learned about identity, how important it is, especially during a pandemic when everybody's working from home and there's so many more vulnerabilities. And I think we've had ongoing discussions, which we'd love to involve you in, but thank you for that. That was very educational to me. Thank you. I would like to introduce our second emerging, and we do these fast, folks. These are like kind of rapid fire, get some good information across, and hopefully we keep things moving. And we try to, I think the presenters do a real good job getting a lot of information out quick. But our next panel is, next talk is going to be with Maurice Unuma, who's Vice President of Federal and Enterprise over at Tripwire. How are you doing, Maurice? Did I get your name halfway right there?
You did. It's its own form of encryption. It's not an easy one.
That's the way we roll here in the federal government section. Well, thank you. Where are you out of today?
I'm actually out of my home in Naperville, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great place. I can't wait till I go back in the summer and catch a Cubs game. Thank you so much for this.
Absolutely.
Your talk.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And good afternoon to all of you. Primarily out in the Eastern Seaboard and the Mid-Atlantic, where I've also spent plenty of my life out there as well. I'm going to take a few moments today to talk about integrity and integrity management and the importance of that first as a foundational organizing concept for cybersecurity. And then secondly, as an important and arguably kind of the ultimate detection backstop when things go wrong. Now, often when we talk about security and we try to define it, we define security in terms of bad things, right? We're trying to understand threats. We're trying to identify threat actors. We're trying to detect malware. We're trying to patch vulnerabilities, address misconfigurations, and so forth. And so we tend to define it relative to bad, and we tend to measure it as the prevention or absence of bad things. We successfully prevented a breach. We avoided failing an audit. Essentially, nothing bad happened, right? But essentially, security foundationally is really about trust. Any sort of healthy, peaceful, productive human relationship is based on trust, as we all know. Physical security is based on trust. It's the ability to trust the people that we're interacting with, trust the people in whom we entrust our security to, and trust the systems that we rely on. And so that's certainly no different in cybersecurity. And in many ways, it is the idea of not just establishing a number of security features and detection capabilities and preventative measures and so forth, but also to be able to kind of look closely at the person or people or place or thing that's being protected and ensuring that it or they are in a good state, that they are in fact okay. And so whether it's the integrity of systems or the integrity of data in our field, it's critically important that we get that. So preventing bad is a necessary component of what we do, but it's insufficient to be comprehensive. And so we really must be able to ensure good, right? We must be able to have confidence that the systems that we are relying on are trustworthy, that they're reliable, that we know what good looks like. In kind of very simple terms, right? If we know that we're good, then we're good, even if we don't know in great detail about all of the bad. So integrity is foundational to what we do. And when it comes to integrity monitoring, and as we kind of delve a little bit deeper into it, right, here's what this actually means in practice. It's being able to compare current state or post-event state with against what we would expect or previous state, right? It's being able to understand what has changed. And if something has changed, is it a routine change? Is it an expected change? Is it an authorized change? Perhaps it was an unauthorized change, but it was by an authorized individual, which may or may not be good or bad to varying degrees. And ultimately, is it a malicious change? And this is important because we know that the bad guys must sooner or later make a change. They must insert an executable, they must elevate privileges, they must modify settings or do something else sooner or later. So we have to be able to detect that. And then as we detect these changes, to be able to rank the events and changes based on risk and value, and ultimately to be able to kind of correlate and reconcile against what's routine or other data sources that talk about the routine expected operation of the environment or system, so that then we can detect those anomalies and understand in greater context what is actually going on. And so automation is key. Now you see here kind of a very basic graphic of a pre-post, right? And it's about knowing before and after. Now this is a fairly rudimentary graphic, but in reality, we know that systems and networks are not quite that simple. And it really is kind of devil in the details. So if we were to assume that this graphic represents a network diagram or represents the files on a critical server or system files in an operating system and so forth, right? We want to be able to know this is what it looked like before or today or yesterday, and this is what it looks like today or tomorrow. Or perhaps this is what it looked like before the lights flickered and there was an outage, and this is what it looks like after. Or perhaps this is what it looked like before there was a suspected incident or breach, and this is what it looks like after. And so the key is to be able to identify what those changes were, right? And it could be perhaps fairly low priority routine type things, right? Non-admin user added or password policy not entirely in compliance with policy. It could be something that's a little bit more potentially serious, right? New routes added to a border router, for example. Or it could be a number of things that would signify a much more potentially malicious or bad incident, right? And this could include things like new unrecognized binaries being added, access privileges that are changing on critical files, listening ports being open, logging disabled, and so forth. So the trick with integrity monitoring is you have to be able to capture rich change data at a high degree of granularity and a high degree of accuracy and precision. But as soon as you do that, then you start to get an awful lot of noise and an awful lot of data. And so then being able to, within the context of everything else that's happening, sift through the noise and identify and understand those changes that are potentially significant is the trick. Now, I've talked here about detection, right? And using integrity monitoring as a detection mechanism, and that's critically important. There's also a role that integrity monitoring plays in prevention in terms of system hardening and compliance. And so if we look at this graphic here and kind of understand it as the compliant state of a system or a group of systems or a network environment over time and its degree of compliance with a desired state, then as you're checking it, right, on a periodic basis, then typically there is an effort to fix problems or address misconfigurations or patch vulnerabilities and so forth. And then over time, you can decrease a bit in your compliance, and then it's time to get ready for the next audit or check and so forth. And you go up and down. In the meantime, there is risk here. And so the key is by tying this effort here, often called, security configuration management with integrity monitoring, we're able to achieve more of a continuous monitoring type of approach because we're combining assessing systems against the desired state with continuously monitoring for change and being able to reconcile the changes against the context of the broader environment. So this is critical both to detection and to prevention. This is something that's at the core of what we do as Tripwire. And so in terms of providing deep granular change detection, it's something that we've been perfecting for well over 2 decades. We can capture a remarkable degree of details that are typically not caught. And across a wide number of different asset types, as well as different operating systems. This includes agent-based and agent-less across on-premises and hybrid environments. It includes comparison against rich policy content and so forth. And ultimately being able to do this across an entire ecosystem to ensure consistency with a healthy baseline. And just as a final slide here, ultimately, this is part of and core to kind of a broader portfolio. What I talked about is reflected here in the blue sections of the rainbow slide here, but that core capability is supplemented then by adjacent capabilities around asset discovery, vulnerability assessment, log management, and so forth from IT to OT environments. So integrity is our passion. Integrity is critically important to security and compliance. It's at the core of what we do. And we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of today's event. Look forward to speaking with many of you afterwards. Thanks so much. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Maurice. That was fantastic. I think it's very timely with everything going on these days. You got to automate this. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Up next, we have one more emerging tech talk before our first panel of the day. And I would like to introduce Ben Boykin. And Ben is the VP of Federal over at Venivy. And can we get Ben on? Ben, you want to take your mute off?
Yep, so I'm off mute, but yeah.
What's your video?
They just allowed me to start the video, so thanks.
There you go. You're in good shape. How are you doing today, Ben?
Great. How about you?
Good. Are you like in the ISS over 200 miles above us or something? I didn't know you were an astronaut. That's pretty good. You can
yeah, exactly.
Run federal and be an astronaut at the same time. No, where actually are you?
Right out of Northern Virginia.
Fantastic. Okay. That's where I call home too. Looking forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Tom. So today I'm here to talk about protecting non-person entities in a perimeterless world. So what does that actually mean? Well, the world is now dominated by machine interactions. Every human interaction is going on with machines. All the systems that keep us going, things like DoorDash or something else, it's all machines, and they all have identities, and those identities need to be managed. And if not, bad things happen, right? In this pandemic, others have already said it, we see that we're currently living and has accelerated the machine identity management market, with the perimeter literally disappearing because of the work of a home explosion. In an instant, just due to the COVID, the whole perimeter is gone and everything is now on the edge. So the machines are taking over, whether it's the eye in the sky, right? Whether they're everywhere. And so this is a screenshot from the film I Am Mother. And if you've seen this film, what you'll quickly realize is that this machine and objects, they can be good or they can be bad. again, there's no longer a perimeter. In a world where the IT security perimeter has quickly diminished, we see a growing reliance on cloud, mobile, IoT. We as cybersecurity professionals must recognize that identity and access management must go beyond people and must also apply to machines, especially with the growing number of automated machine-to-machine connections and communications. These MPEs exist on both the inside and outside of networks, and without proper protection for machine identities, organizations can't guarantee the confidentiality of information that flows between authorized machines or prevent the flow of information to unauthorized machines. So the only thing that you can use to establish trust is identity. On every network, there are two entities on them, people and machines. People identify themselves to a network using usernames and passwords. And then machines talk to one another throughout the network. But instead of using usernames and passwords, they use machine identities. The number of machine identities is increasing exponentially because of digital information is being built on those machines, not people. So globally, we recognize the fact that identities get stolen. And currently we spend about $11 billion a year protecting human identities, but we're spending just hardly anything on protecting machine identities. The cyber criminals know this, and it's very lucrative for them to steal and forge those machine identities, because machine identities allow them to gain broad access into network resources and cover their tracks by hiding in encrypted tunnels. Bottom line, if you don't know where your machine identities are installed and exactly who's using them, you may never be sure they're not being misused by cyber criminals. What we've seen in this world we live in is that user identities are under siege, and we've all seen the headlines about the usernames being compromised, user identities being out there, and lately we have started to see what's happened in machine identities as well. Everything from Paige Thomas, what happened at AWS, bad threat actors are compromising, attacking environments, using focus injections or attacks that are specifically aimed and focused on SSH keys. So what are machine-based NPEs, and what are the things they actually create? What are those entities that we're talking about? And what we're talking about are the devices on a daily basis, the code that is running alongside of these devices, alongside of the services they are utilizing, as well as the future algorithms that are being present. So what do we use to authenticate those identities? Well, it is by SSL and TLS certificates, SSH keys, code signing certificates, mobile and IoT certificates. The notion always is that what we're using is digital keys and certificates to establish machine identities. So definition of authentication is a collaboration of a claimed identity and cooperation of this process. So that's the state of the perimeterless world. So let's get and explore some of the trends that we've been seeing in the world. It links back to this iceberg problem, where everyone can inherently and fundamentally understand that 90% of this iceberg is underwater. Well, that's the ratio between people and NPEs. That's the ratio between interactive people on networks and interactive machines on networks, and what those look like. So as I'm clicking through, please notice carefully that the background scale changes from 50 billion to the scale, top of the scale, going to 300 billion. This is exactly 50x an increase in the number of total devices over the increase that we've seen in people, which is minuscule. So there are 3 NPE related attacks that us as cybersecurity professionals need to prepare against. And the first is preparing against supply chain attacks by effectively securing your entire code signing process with an agile, fast, secure code signing solution. Second is we realized that attackers are aggressively targeting the DevOps process. At this point, everybody's using SSH keys and generating keys, which typically means there's a tremendous amount of key sprawl to secure their CI/CD pipeline, which is causing an explosion in SSH machine types, which leads to compromised SSH keys and that key sprawl. And lastly, as cybersecurity professionals, we always have to look out for expired, untrusted, forged TLS certificates. We have all seen and know what those examples look like. Equifax breach was one. They're literally across the board. We hear about them in the headlines. And we see this and know that they're all over the place, especially when you see just the amount of security control and inspection devices that are being deployed throughout our networks in order to secure our environments. And each one of those devices requires machine identities. So how do we prepare? The whole purpose of this is to collaborate in order to share ways and prepare and securely secure your NPEs. So whether you follow the NPE management guidance, which is a term that DISA phrased, or whether you call it machine identity, which is a Gartner term, as an organization, you must have visibility. As an enterprise, you must have that single pane of glass that gives you a single system of record for all of your machine identities. Second, you must have intelligence. Intelligence allows you to know everything about your machine identities, how they're used, the risks that they pose, how these identities align with the organizational policy, and lastly, automation. You must have the capability to automate and adjust at the speed and scale that the enterprise architecture requires. As I close, I just wanted to share how you can get further information. So these links, the first one here is the hype cycle for IAM technologies, which can be found on that website. And that's a 2020 report. And the second is Gartner's Technology Insight for X.509 certificate management. Again, when we are all here trying to restructure what an IAM director or person that owns a discipline within the organization, how they can scope and what they need to do to go alongside everything that's important from human identities as well. And both of these guides and downloadable resources are helpful. I hope this was helpful and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
And thank you for that. I try to get that sci-fi movie Mother out of my mind. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's a wild one, isn't it, Tom?
It's a wild one. It's kind of chilling. So we'll yeah, go ahead and watch that sometime. And I think everything you said is very timely to what we're trying to do at ATARC in 2021. You know, we want to have a supply chain group, you know, to look at those threats. I mean, for those government in the audience, your job's not getting any easier. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And we have Vincent Sridapan from Ciso is going to talk more about IoT and mobile and some of the other threats that we have out there outside of our perimeter. So thank you very much. That was a good one, Ben. Appreciate it. Great. That was Ben Boykin, VP of Federal over at Venafi. Very interesting work they're doing over there. And I'd like to introduce the moderator for the panel, our first panel, Isaac Constance. Isaac is a staff writer over at GovLoop. You must read his work, follow him on Twitter. It's been a little bit since we've seen you. I don't think we've seen you since in a month or two, at least before Christmas at some point, right?
I think so, Tom. Yeah. Hair's gotten a little bit longer since then.
I noticed that. I noticed that. Well, thank you for doing this today. And I'll turn over this great panel over to you and look forward to watching you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tom. And I enjoyed the must follow on Twitter too. That message is appreciated. Well, anyway, I want to get right to this panel because as we know, cybersecurity, it might not have been the top news item recently, but certainly it has been in the news. The SolarWinds breach has affected federal agencies far and wide. That includes DOJ, DOD, energy. It really runs a gamut. So, you know, that's kind of the story of the pandemic. We've seen some big attacks. We've seen more of them, and agencies have had to make adjustments. So we want to focus on what specific agencies are doing, as well as what different solutions that we have. So starting off, I'd like to introduce my panelists and ask them to turn their cameras on, mics on. Looks like we've got everybody. So thank you all for being here. First off, we have Greg Singleton, who's the director of the Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We also have Roy Fernando. Roy is a security architect for the U.S. SBA, or Small Business Administration. Gary Dodd is the Chief Information Security Officer of Information Technology for the Bonneville Power Administration within the Department of Energy. And then John Fange is the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer for Micro Focus. So, gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here today. And I want to get right into the conversation. So, Roy, we can start with you, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in a little bit more detail, as well as some of the topics you'll be talking about today. And Roy, I'm not sure if you're coming through on my end.
How are you guys? Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine now.
Hey, hi, everybody. I'm sorry about that. I was double muted. I'm Roy Fernando. I work for as a security architect for SBA. Recently, I joined SBA from ATARC. I am working on our Zero Trust program, TIC 3.0, modernizing our vulnerability and patch management process, and working on the IoT processes and SD-WAN solutions. And recently, you have known like Solomon supply chain attack happened, but we cannot talk what happened within our agency. But all I can say, we were well prepared to tackle the issue. The technologies we had in place, able to identify and be able to take appropriate actions to mitigate the risk. And because we are, we put technologies and protections in places so we can mitigate this type of risks coming across the wire. And also, moreover, it's all depending on, it's all because of our management buying into what we are saying, what we need to get done. And we will say, they will come, we will go and tell them some crazy ideas that they will like, okay, what they're going to do for us and what's the threat, how we can do it, what's the budget. That's the last piece, the biggest one. So we will come up with some creative ways to mitigate this risk. And I will be talking around how SBA is working through these kinks, because since COVID and how much things happening rapidly and teleworking, and how we extend our services to all of our customers, and what are the challenges we have within our environment. Thank you.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you, Roy. Next up, we can go to Greg Singleton. Greg, same question for you. If you could just provide a little bit of introduction, as well as explain some of the topics and issues you are encountering.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, ATARC, for kind of asking us to join you guys today. So my name is Greg Singleton. I'm the director of the Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center, or HC3, at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I want to introduce kind of my office because it's a little bit unique from some other formulations of cybersecurity. We've got a pretty formalistic government-sounding mission that's to help ensure cybersecurity in the health sector, provide information resources to organizations of all size. And it's kind of boring and dry and government-y. But there's a tweet that captures our mission, I think, a little bit better. And it's from the Cyber Sun Tzu. And it says, the competent cyber warrior learns from their mistakes, but the cyber master learns from the mistakes of others. And what we do, and what my shop does, is kind of really an intelligence and communication shop. Our job is to understand what's going on in the sector, what's going on in other sectors, how these things can impact elements of the healthcare sector, how they can impact elements of the U.S. government, and reach out and communicate. And, I think some of what I do want to talk about today are not only the challenges we faced as the U.S. Government Health and Human Services, so a very large agency, being faced with, unprecedented cybersecurity pandemic challenges, while also being asked to respond to the pandemic and help lead us through that. But also just kind of talk about some of the cybersecurity challenges as information management challenges and complexity management challenges, and how you need tools, you need the systems, you need the people in place. You also need to be able to understand your environment. You need to be able to understand your posture, your perimeter, and to be able to make actionable decisions on that is really an important challenge in the cyber realm, and something that we see over and over again. So look forward to talking about those elements when we get into the better discussion. But thank you, Isaac.
Absolutely. So moving down the line here, Gary Dodd, we'll go over to you next. Just same question as for everyone else, the introduction as well as what you are focusing on right now.
Oh, well, thanks, Isaac. Hi, everyone. My name is Gary Dodd. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Vulnerable Power Administration. It might be worth noting, many people don't even out here in the Pacific Northwest, folks don't know what BPA is. So I'll do a brief introduction of the sub-agency I work for. We are part of the Department of Energy, as Isaac said, but in fact, we are a kind of a unique part of the federal government. There's only a few other agencies like us. We're completely self-funded. We actually pay interest on loans back into the Treasury. We haven't missed a Treasury payment in many, many, many years, decades. And in fact, we operate and maintain an electric utility that provides 3/4 of all the high voltage transmission for the Pacific Northwest. We have 15,000 circuit miles of transmission lines, as well as 350 substations, and we manage and sell the power that comes from 31 projects, 31 dams on the Federal Columbia River Power System, as well as we have a line of AC, high voltage DC converted AC electricity that goes from the Columbia River to Southern California that can provide enough power to light up 7 cities the size of Seattle. So we're a fairly large footprint in the Pacific Northwest, but we're one of the Northwest's best kept secrets, I always like to say. What I'm going to talk about is how we transitioned virtually and realistically overnight. One day we were all working in the office, and the next day we took 4,000 people and made them remote workers. And we did that overnight, literally. And how we did that, how we got lucky with some things, and how some things were a challenge for us, and how we are successfully navigating that now.
Well, excellent. And then, John, I know you've got a unique perspective of all of this coming from the private sector and working across different agencies. So why don't you explain your role and then also what you've been seeing out in the field?
Sure. So I'm with Micro Focus, which is one of the larger software vendors to the federal government, and I'm the CTO for Public Federal. We're probably at your agency under a product name like Fortify or ArcSight or one of the other many products we have, but you might not know the name Micro Focus. So our emphasis and my focus currently is on 2 topics. One is TIC 3.0, which 12 months ago, I don't think anybody would have put on their radar screen. But because of EIS and a number of other things, it's coming like a freight train. And unlike TIC 1.0 and 2.0, TIC 3.0 is very little about networks and access, and it's about 85 or 90% about data privacy and data access. So it's a very, very different mindset. And the traditional players, such as telecom operators, et cetera, require a much broader bouquet of capabilities to deliver on those TIC 3.0 capabilities. Secondly is resilience. We know that systems are going to be affected by cyber incidents, and the resilience emphasis not only extends to how fast we can respond to a major known threat or incident, but also how we can automate the obvious things, whether it's unusual user access, et cetera, in an automated fashion to leverage your SOC and other security personnel's capabilities more powerfully.
Excellent. Well, I think we get right into the Q&A part of this panel. I know we also have some poll questions. So Alyssa, if you can push that first one for us. I believe that question is, what is the biggest barrier your agency is facing during the pandemic? And audience, you all should have a chance to answer that one, and I'll report the results once they come around. But Roy, what are some of the unique challenges that you all have encountered during the pandemic? I know SBA's size ballooned, because of the need and distributing PPP loans, as well as a bunch of other financial aid because of stimulus packages. But what are some of those unique challenges and the solutions that you all came up to counter them? I think maybe this is just my end. I don't think we can hear you just yet.
Okay, sorry. So one of the biggest challenges we had throughout the entire network is the identity and access management, because we have 3 different cloud providers, and we have a lot of small businesses. We need to provision them to get their loans. And not only that, and we have to onboard new employees to support the COVID program. So what we did was, instead of going traditional identity and access management, like user ID, password, PIU process, we changed our entire process to look into different identities. And we put in place like Duo or any other two-factor authentication in place. And we made our onboarding process seamless and faster. Usually it took like 4 to 6 months to onboard. Because of this new processes, we able to onboard people within 2 weeks. And because we already were looking at these things previously, and COVID gave us a good jump start to move towards that. And these things are not going to go anywhere, because management understood that we can use other ways around to get these people onboarded and provide a faster service. So that's one of the biggest things we had when it comes to this pandemic and how our preparedness. The next thing is the lack of IT resources. But what we did was we did some gap analysis within our existing tools, and we figured it out. There are certain areas we are not utilizing. So instead of adding cost to our existing budget, we're trying to streamline and make more use out of our existing tools to support not only the infrastructure services and on the security side as well.
When I see we got that poll result back, it looked like 52% of people said cybersecurity was their biggest barrier. Another 28% said lack of resources was. So we're talking about the right thing. That's the good news. Greg, moving on to you. I'm sure that you all have noticed quite a difference in the threat patterns that you're seeing at HHS. So what are some of those differences that you've noticed, and what are some of the solutions you've brought in as well?
Sure. I mean, it's certainly a good question. As we, and part of what I mentioned is, as we're working towards dealing with this pandemic, it was not only the need to get the infrastructure in place to support the remote workforce, the need to deal with the infectious elements of the disease, but also noting that, as an agency, we all of a sudden became the focus of the response. And so we're bringing in a whole slew of additional resources, personnel and others to respond to the pandemics. We're also facing, a interest from others that are looking to get access to data, interest from others that are looking to get access to subcomponents of HHS. And then, some amounts of just what I'll say malicious harassment to try to, discourage confidence in the U.S. government and in the government's response to the pandemic. What we have seen in terms of the targeting trends and differences is certainly just a massive increase in exploitation attempts related to topics of the day. And now the topic of the day, or 6 months ago, the topic of the day was COVID. So what we started to see was some malicious actors, they made a weaponized version of the Johns Hopkins University COVID tracker map, and they were selling that on the dark web. And so we sent an alert out to folks being like, hey, be aware of this weaponized website, because you think you're going to get information on COVID, you're going to get information on COVID, and then you're also going to get TrickBot onto your machines. We saw a large uptick in the number of COVID-19 themed domains that were malicious. So domains that are hosting malware, clickbait stuff, trying to get you into an ecosystem to ultimately exploit your machine. That stuff has shifted a little bit from COVID-specific themes, now going over more towards vaccine-related themes. Everyone would like a vaccine, and the government's certainly working to provide those to the population. And so we're seeing kind of shifts and jumps as the actors do follow the themes of the day. Anything really to get you to click and to be able to exploit your machine. I'd say lastly, what we quite honestly did see and did warn about just at the beginning of November, we did see what looked like a concerted effort to compromise U.S. hospitals. And there's quite a bit of news over this where, there's effort to maybe compromise as many as 400 hospitals. And so we worked with our federal partners, FBI, Ciso, and others to put out an alert, get some other actions in place, and ultimately we were able to mitigate quite a bit of damage through that campaign. So, we have seen some shifts. Again, a lot of it is following topics. I will not say that too much of it is different from what we've expected, but the volume and intensity has increased, certainly as the expectation or hopes that they can get remote workers to click into stuff has increased. So that's about what we've seen.
Absolutely. And Gary, you had talked about that that move that you all made itself, just onboarding, or not even onboarding, but transitioning employees to remote work. What sort of challenges did that present to you from a cybersecurity front? And did you all have to employ any new technologies or strategies to deal with it?
Well, we actually got very lucky in that regard. Several years ago, we hired a gentleman to head up our infrastructure development team. And this person came from the healthcare industry, right? And he looked at our service delivery model, he looked at the challenges, and he started pushing on virtualization, both for cost cutting and for service delivery. And that was the big push. And he relentlessly pushed to get adoption of that, to make sure that service provided to people with virtualized workstations was equal to or greater than somebody that had a standard desktop or thick client, if you will. He pushed for that hard. And at the time we thought, well, this is a great idea for service delivery and so forth and so on. But they continued to mature that and continue to increase adoption of that technology, to the point when we went from, on March 12th to March 13th of last year, we went from working in the brick and mortar environment to working remotely. It was seamless for almost everyone because they had this virtualized desktop that was the same at work as it was at home. And we ran into very few challenges there. Now, we did encounter bandwidth issues, and we were able to increase that and so forth. Some of the challenges that we did run into, though, had more to do with as many of the speakers have talked about, data loss prevention. As an electric utility, we are most concerned about, the reliability, right? We focus on reliability and integrity, and confidentiality is kind of a backseat. We don't have a great deal of terribly sensitive data that we're concerned about. And sometimes, as you guys know, the trade-off between confidentiality, integrity, and availability may actually exclude one of the three to satisfy the needs of another. As we started moving into a telework environment after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it was fine. But after it dragged on, folks started to want to print documents, and we don't allow that. We were able to actually hold back the disintegration of the perimeter by using this virtualized environment, and also through our smartphones by providing good service delivery with devices that can also be trusted. So we've kind of held back on the disintegration of the perimeter, do use the cloud. But one thing we don't do a great deal of work on is the data loss prevention. So people were emailing themselves documents in order to print them, right, to be frank. And so that was a challenge we had to get in there, not just based on technology and filtering all those things that you want to make sure you're doing, but also in just making people aware of the risks associated with that. The fact that there are hard drives on many printers, and there's residual information there that may exist. Customer outreach and outreach to employees is very important in that regard, as well as in our phishing program. We have an internal phishing program, very successful in teaching people how to recognize phishing attempts. We had to tweak that a little bit when, as Greg was indicating, that there was a shift in the sort of threat focus from ordinary. I mean, they always do, Christmas time or whatever. So it was a current event thing, but it was a lot of COVID stuff. And there's a lot of misinformation about COVID, about the vaccination programs, about the research, about the intent. about the federal government's response and all of these things. And so we purposely did not use any of those themes for our internal phishing. We did not want to further exacerbate that issue or further break down the trust model there.
Absolutely. So I think that's an interesting point too, just to follow up on is you hear more and more about this world without security perimeters nowadays, but you all had to uphold that to maintain how you were working. It was just extending that a little and including trusted devices. Is that correct? Right.
Yeah. So what we have is a situation where mobile devices or the virtualized environments that are on people's home PCs, right, the virtual desktops, they are all going back into our network and they're going out through the filters that we have, both the ones provided by the government, like Einstein, and as well as our own internal filters for both email and internet. And this allows us to do, as Roy was talking about, is learning from other people's mistakes, right? We have a 24/7 threat intelligence analysis center. And of course, they're getting in indicators of compromise and information from partners and customers, and of course, the federal government. And we watch to see what indicators of compromise are, command and control nodes, and so forth. If we black hole a DNS entry for a command and control node, but yet people can go a different way to the network on one of our devices, then we've just cut ourselves off at the knees. So yeah, we've been able to hold the line on that perimeter breaking down on individual devices. And I would say the reason that I've been able to do that is not because I'm the most awesome CISO in the world, but it's because my infrastructure people are very good at customer service. They're very good at adhering to the security requirements I try to give them, and they're very good at making sure that what they provide meets the needs of the customers. And that's a very important topic, because people, as we all know, will find a way to do what they need to do to get their job done, regardless of the cybersecurity barriers you might put in place. So whatever solution you provide needs to work for them to accomplishing their mission and doing their job.
Definitely all about making it accessible for the users. So John, I know one program that actually touches on this new environment is TIC 3.0, Trusted Internet Connections Program. And they have a zero trust use case that they're looking into. Why don't you explain a little bit more about that, and what does that mean for federal agencies?
Well, I think TIC 3.0 will become the best thing that's ever happened to the zero trust movement, because it's finally some legislation and formality in the federal space that gives agencies a reason to spend money specifically on that requirement. And zero trust is a great goal. It's a buzzword, been around for a while, and there's some amazing products out there, but there hasn't been a reason to prioritize it. So I think that's high on the list, and that extends obviously to user access management, multi-factor authentication, privileged access management, as well as data segmentation and data control.
Excellent. Well, Alyssa, I know we've only got about 12 minutes left here, believe it or not. So we're going to try to get through 2 more rounds of questions. That's the goal I'm going to set. But we can go ahead and push that poll question number 2 and make sure that our audience gets a chance to answer that. What were the greatest challenges your agency experienced as it transitioned to a digital organization? Let's go to the next round of questions. Roy, heading back over to you. What are some lessons learned at SBA over the course of the pandemic when it comes to security?
I'm muted this time by myself. That's good. One of the biggest things we learned is, like the gentleman from DHS said, is the phishing tags. And we will get tons of emails usually, but this spread like 10 times more than what we are getting. And we had good phishing programs in place to identify and take care of those things. And also the biggest uptick we had is our user base, is the internet threshold, is throttling, and all kind of other things comes with bandwidth issues, because we went overnight to become a fully fledged teleworking agency. And that's something, even though we had prepared our environment to a different level, and we were expecting this type of things, because most of these things are part of our BCP exercises. We run a tabletop exercise and live scenarios if What if one of our sites goes down? What we're going to do? What's the fallback? So we ran this type of scenarios previously, and it would become a regular thing after a while. And so it's all about preparation. And we have resources. We always tell all of our users, use them wisely, because it's the entire public, depending on us, the more we utilize what we have, and we can provide the best service. The other thing is we saw not only phishing, we had a lot of exploit through our social media platforms. We had came through a lot of Twitter accounts open on behalf of SBA, and we had LinkedIn accounts open for us by somebody else, and we had a lot of Facebook accounts, and we have an excellent threat intel team. They able to identify and took them down in no time, and they are much faster than other agencies. So, like I said, it's biggest challenge we had was how to secure the network. That's one of those reasons we looked into the TIC 3.0 program. It's a huge shift from 2.0 to 3.0. It's not about your traffic, it's about how the whole process, and you want to bind the whole thing into your security program and how you're going to protect your intellectual data. For us, it's the PII, HIPAA data, and all of the privacy information. So that's a really good thought out program. We are into the weeds. We are putting our program into, we're looking into it, and we have a couple of guys from our same team. They are co-chairing the TIC program for ATARC. So we are hands down. We are going towards the TIC 3 and also SD-WAN, because we are looking into a no boundary network anymore. There's no boundaries for us anymore, basically. Everybody's becoming our perimeter. So that's the mindset we are taking, and we are marching on those things right now.
Definitely. Greg, going to you. I know you had mentioned already how important the kind of that trust factor was when receiving communications and making sure that your users knew how to handle it, how to handle phishing. What sorts of lessons did you learn from this, and what was that education side of things for you all?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it is a good question in terms of the, this just, I've listened to people talk and just thinking through, everyone's like, oh yeah, it was March 12th, 13th, 14th. And it pretty much was that one day where all of us said, we're going all remote. And, in conjunction with that, needing to get users comfortable with and up to speed with their telework and remote capabilities, while simultaneously maintaining kind of appropriate security procedures and protocols and all the requirements of the federal mission. It certainly was a significant challenge. I think for our direct user education, we didn't do anything uniquely different, but normal, spear phishing training, just kept that up, kept visibility on it, just clear communications with the users. I would say one of the things that, and it wasn't all challenges, one of the advantages of being in the midst of an emergency where, we're all going remote, we got to make this happen, is kind of a clear unity of purpose and mission. And so things that would be kind of a, 10%, 15% project or part-time work by somebody that stretched out over many months became things where it was, no, you get it done by tomorrow or 2 days from now. And so, there were some very clear, urgent, prioritized needs up front and early in these transitions. And I think it allowed us to, for all the users, we got systems in place, we got things configured, and we got the users up to speed about what they needed to do, just because it was compressed into such a short focused period of time.
Right. Yeah. There was no other option but to get it done. And agencies passed that test with flying colors. So Gary, moving on to you, I know you had mentioned that you all had a lot of the pieces in play with that virtualization, but what are some lessons you learned during this process?
Well, I learned the extent to which human beings need to see each other the way we are now, at the very least. We very specifically told folks, let's not have video conference. We'll do teleconferences. we really don't want to use up all our bandwidth on video. And I'm sure that created some habits, right? People not necessarily shaving first thing in the morning and perhaps coming to meetings in PJs. But after a bit of time, after several months of this, people started to really clamor for this, and they wanted us to get some cameras to them because that wasn't necessarily part of their loadout, and to get that kind of face-to-face. And so, like everyone else, the technologies that we're using now became much more important. And so the infrastructure team had to increase our bandwidth in order to accommodate that. I think that was the most important thing I learned here. I don't think any of us expected to be working from home for 6 months. And there were just things we didn't think about. The other thing is that, there were lots and lots of little things in our COOP program that we thought we had thought through, but we didn't. People needed a specific piece of equipment. People needed to have bigger monitors. And so we had to work with our emergency management teams to come up with rules for re-entering the workspace in a sort of mindful and staggered manner with management approval and protocols in place so that people could retrieve government equipment and bring it home to work. And so we were able to do that. And then of course you have to track that equipment and make sure you know who's got it and where it went and all those sorts of things. We just had to figure that out. That was what it was, is just moving to a virtualized office space was a lot more intensive in terms of the bandwidth utilization than we expected, because people really want to see each other.
Makes sense. No, and yeah, virtual meetings are different with camera as opposed to just being on the phone. It's amazing how much you talk over each other. John, going over to you. I know you had mentioned early on in your introduction the importance of being operationally resilient during this. So what are the components of that you've seen?
Well, I can remember as a federal IT executive, the topic of working from home was just almost salacious. And if somebody had mentioned half an agency working from home, you would have been thrown out of the building or put in jail. And now we accelerated 5 or more years in technology enablement in less than 12 months. So I think that pace of change is probably here to stay. And the expectation of resiliency in all of our applications and systems is just going to increase, because the workday is no longer 7:30 to 4:30. It's occurring much longer and much broader shifts in time. So I think this is the new normal. It's exciting for us as technology problem solvers to be a part of helping great organizations across the federal government fix these problems creatively, quickly, sometimes with our software, sometimes with other people's. But I'll throw it out there. I'm a problem solver by heart as an electrical engineer. If any agency personnel out there want some free opinions consultation to help you think through your priorities as it relates to cyber resilience, TIC 3.0, identity access management, just give me a call. I'm happy to, I'd love the challenge.
Excellent use of the word salacious too. I appreciate that. So I think we have time, and Alyssa, we can push the final poll question just so that we can fit this in. Rapid fire answers, I'll say 30 seconds apiece. But John had mentioned that new normal. What's that going to look like? What can we expect in this new either hybrid or remote environment that we've kept on transitioning to? And Roy, we can start with you.
We will see more of a remote, like 80-20 split, because everybody's comfortable. The production is really high. People are producing more than it used to be. And, it's a green. It's easy and environment friendly. So we would like to see 80-20 split in SBA.
Absolutely. Gary, how about you? What will that look like? And from a security side of things as well, any changes that you anticipate?
Yeah, we tend to look at the office worker primarily. And for that, as I indicated, there weren't a lot of work, but we are an electric utility. So a very important part of our staff is out in the world working on the substations, the power lines, keeping the electricity flowing. And for those people, we're continuing to work more on mobile technology and mobile access. There are places they go, they don't have the kind of internet access that we'd like them to have, or cellular access. So mobile, I think is for those teams. They need to be able to connect with all the resources they need and still be out there on the front lines getting things done. That's an important part of our culture that we're going to have to work on.
Definitely a topic for a future conference, maybe 5G as a means to enabling that. Greg, moving on to you. what should we keep an eye on as this new normal continues?
This might be a little bit of a pivot on topics, but when I think of new normal, I think we're going to see greater scrutiny and intense focus on supply chains and supply chain attacks, and really concerted attention from the federal government, as well as, frankly, I expect within the vendors and vendor community to be looking at both their own software and the software that they're introducing into their environments. I think that's one thing that has come out of this, and I expect quite a bit of work on that moving forward.
Definitely. And then John, I'll give you the final 30 seconds. Go for it.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think increasingly with the latest breach, there's been a panic of urgency around identity and access management in a variety of contexts, multi-factor authentication for every application, even on mainframes, all the way down to data segmentation and data protection, as well as credentialing as a privileged access management, if you will, emphasis. Thank you.
Sure thing. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all of the audience for tuning in. And Roy, Gary, Greg, John, I think we got a lot of insight out of this. So thank you so much for sharing. I know we're 1 minute over, Tom, so I'll turn it back to you right now.
We'll let you get away with that one. That was a fantastic panel. Thanks for everybody that joined. And Isaac, you're going to be a pro. I better watch out. I think you're going to take my job one day.
That's what I'm aiming for.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day. Thank you for doing that for us. All right. Next up, we are going to hear from David DeSanto, and David is the Senior Director of Product Management over at GitLab. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing well. How's the conference going so far?
It's going fantastic. I like the bobbleheads in the back. Is that like Super Mario or something?
Yeah, there's the child from The Mandalorian. I'm a little bit of a nerd. There's
I like it.
Miles Morales Spider-Man back there, and Baby Groot for the little bobbleheads back there.
Oh, okay. Well, the cuteness factor's off the charts for that. Thank you for doing this today. And you guys have been a great partner to us. You've really contributed to the community. I know that we're using you all as our code repository over the DevSecOps group, and I love your team. They're always coming up with innovative new things that we then take to the rest of ATARC. So thank you. I look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. So let me get my presentation shared. Okay, I'm assuming that's visible to you, Tom. We'll go with yes. So
yes, I can see it. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. So as Tom mentioned, I'm David DeSanto, Senior Director of Product Management for our security portfolio here at GitLab. Today, I want to talk to you about shifting security left and truly shifting security left. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to kind of go over what the problem is, what it actually looks like to shift left, and then give you some examples. So when people talk about shift left, there's generally a couple myths or assumptions that are made. And I want to kind of highlight those for you up front because they're ways that you don't shift left, though people will associate them. The first is a statement, all security scanning done during development is shift left. That's not actually true. You are scanning before you release, but that is not truly shifting security left. Asking developers to run the security tools themselves outside their traditional workflow leads to my little unhappy developer here on the right side of the slide. Again, that's not truly shifting left either. And then finally, expecting developers to understand what tools to run when and how to interpret the results. Developers, very smart people, but they're not security experts, and we shouldn't rely on them to become that. They're already doing their part by building the software that is being used. But if you take those assumptions I just shared and then you throw them together and try to build out what you would call your DevSecOps tool chain, you end up with all these disparate tools interconnected. You also end in a situation where there's a lot of complexity to it, very fragile. Risk, you don't always have visibility to what's going on. And of course, it leads to a lack of transparency between the teams that are doing the work. I now want to explain to you what it is like to truly shift left. And if you're implementing shift left successfully and doing that harder shift left, you're actually going to be running security scans as much as possible and as deep as possible, so early into the process. You're also going to have the scans be kicked off as part of CI. So that way nobody actually has to go and manually run the scan. And the results show back up within the developer's native workflow. So in the case of GitLab, that would be within the merge request. You also want to run scans on Delta code changes, which allows scans to run within minutes. And if it's a small code change, you can run in seconds, as opposed to some traditional security tools, which if they're scanning, say, your entire code base and you've got a lot of lines of source code, it could take hours, sometimes even up to a day to fully scan the source code. And you want the results to be easily understood, be fully actionable, and make it so the developers are empowered to do their work. And if you're doing that properly, you end up with this smiling developer I have here on the right as well. But if you're truly shifting left, you're bringing that security testing as close to developer as possible and making it so it's just automatic and runs as part of the process, you're making a shift from what is traditionally a sequential DevOps process where each thing is a step. You've got friction at handoff points, people working in silos. That's inefficient and it's not really transparent. To concurrent DevOps. And there was a research paper done, and I'll make sure to include it with the slides, where it talks about being able to ship code 200 times faster if you're doing concurrent DevOps. And what that's allowing you to do is have better efficiencies, transparency, so teams can work together. You have a governed process following whatever regulations you need to meet. And your security is just embedded in, and it's a known factor as part of that process. There are a lot of security tools available today. I want to kind of touch on the most popular here, so you can all kind of get a sense as to what you can be doing when you're shifting left. So starting with SAST, or Static Application Security Testing, these scanners are going to be searching your source code, looking for vulnerabilities, as well as weaknesses. And because it can see the source code, it can actually tell you what line the vulnerability is on. Other common components that can see the source code include secret detection, where it's looking for credentials, API keys, and so forth within your source code, as well as your Git history. That way, if you've done something like inadvertently committed a secret, but you now removed it from the code base, it's still in that revision history, being able to identify that for you so you can delete it. And the last really common scanning that you can do that can see the source code and leverages the building of the application is what's called as software composition analysis. And that's made up of dependency scanning and license compliance. So really, it's about checking the third-party dependencies you're pulling into your application and making sure they are secure and that they're not using licenses that you don't approve of. An example of that being, maybe you only want to allow MIT licensed dependencies. Anything that's like AGPL could be flagged and blocked from being merged. And then there's another side of this equation, which is actually scanning the application the way it would be run and interacted with by users. And then you get into things such as dynamic application security testing, which is scanning for web vulnerabilities inside your application. You also get into things like DAST API, we're now testing that backend component the web application could be using. Fuzz testing, it's been around for a long time, but it's becoming very popular again. And it's focused on injecting malformed inputs into your application to find unknown vulnerabilities. And then finally, you can be running container scanning. You can do this on both the container when it's built, as well as continue to run it once it's pushed out into production. And at GitLab, we pull all those results back into our vulnerability management. So I've got that called out here as well. But this allows you to actually work together, triage, track, and resolve vulnerabilities in your application. I want to give you a sense as to when you can use these scanners as part of a true shift left. And here, starting on the far left, you've got the first commit. This can even be your first line of code written. As soon as that is committed, you can begin to run the first three scanners there. SAST, your secret detection, and coverage guided fuzz testing. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like here in a minute. And again, that could literally be one line of code. You could have one line of code that you checked in that is a bad SQL injection or a bad SQL statement that can cause an injection. And that can be flagged right away, super early in your development. As you get closer to merging a chunk of code, you're starting to look at the software composition analysis, where you're going to be scanning the dependencies you're now using to build your application, verifying licenses and so forth. And as you move into build and into test, that's where you can begin using container scanning and making sure your container is being built securely. You can begin to run security attacks against the app because the app now runs. Whereas the earlier scans didn't even require an app to be built and running yet. And when you combine all these together and you use things like DAST and API fuzzing, you can continue to test into production to make sure if there's a new vulnerability that's discovered in the world, you can make sure your app isn't susceptible to it. That way you don't actually have to pull that all the way back into development just to verify that. So to kind of make this be very clear, I want to give you a couple of examples. So on the screen here is a very simple Go function. It's not even a functioning app yet. It's just taking input. And we can actually run coverage guided fuzz testing against this and inject malformed traffic or malformed payloads into this function here. On the screen, you can see we've got this parse complex function. It's checking for a length of the data input to be equal to 6. And then after that, it's going to check each value within that array. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here is a common off by 1 mistake developers can make. Here we're checking for a length of 6, but we're accessing a 7th data component in that array. That's accessing memory that's out of bounds to the application, and that's something that could be exploitable. And so here, without the application even needing to be run, we're able to identify and flag that for the developers. Next on the screen is an example for SAST. And I just mentioned this one a couple minutes ago. Here you can see we have a insert statement in our SQL query here, and we're taking in customer data or user inputted data, and it's not being sanitized. So that could potentially be exploited and get access to more information in the database that you should have access to. And finally, here I have one line, and it's my super top secret password. So hopefully none of you use this after the presentation for accessing anything. But here it's hard coded in there, and secret detection flags it as, hey, you've got a secret within your application. So to kind of take us home here, I just want to highlight a couple of values for you here, and then I could open up to questions if we can do that. If you're shifting your testing truly right, your security testing, you're getting scanning done at commit time, which is going to lower the impact to the developers. You're also getting feedback within minutes, as opposed to waiting to say your test period or production, which could then be weeks to months. And then finally, implementing solutions and addressing the vulnerabilities earlier saves you a lot of money. And you can see that here on the screen. There's great paper by NIST that goes over that. And by doing all this, you're really positioned to be able to truly shift security left and meet DevSecOps best practices. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that GitLab has everything I just talked to you about. So if you're not familiar with us, please check it out. When I send out the deck, it's going to include links to all of our different tools, including our direction. And if you have any feedback, we're an open core company. We'll gladly take feedback and interact with you on how we can make the product better. So with that, I think I finished like a minute early, a couple of minutes because we ran over.
You're doing fantastic. That was a very good presentation. The development is near and dear to my heart because I don't think developers, that's the last thing they think of security, but I know it's very costly to go back and you get a little sticky contractually, even when you've done all this development, you think it's great, then, you know, the security group and the government spits it back out, and then who's going to pay for all this recoding? Hey, David, how do you see it effectively, like in an organization? How should the Ciso get involved? I mean, yes, there's some tools. How do you integrate that security besides the tooling? How have you seen that work well in the government?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my experience, and what I see is commonly successful, is getting the CISO kind of involved at that high level view, giving them a risk-based view, whether that's a vulnerability management dashboard, compliance dashboard, where they can actually see that the processes and things that are required for the company are implemented and they're working and they're able to identify risk and manage it accordingly. We have those types of dashboards in our product today. I know other security tools do as well. But ultimately, you really want to see that high level view. You don't want to make your CISO go down into the weeds and look at lines of code to understand what's going on.
Right, right. No, fantastic. Thank you for that. That was really informative. We've gotten got some inputs on the side, you know, on my text that was a good one. So appreciate that. And I hope you have a good rest of the day, rest of the week, rest of the month, and rest of the year. I think
may 2021 be better than 2020.
I think safe bet. I think it's going to be a little better. Thank you, David.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'll turn off my video and go to the next presentation. I can answer those offline.
Okay, then. That sounds great. Thanks. I would appreciate that.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David, for that. Up next will be our last panel of the day, and we're going to make it count. We've got our moderator, Billy Mitchell. Billy is editor-in-chief over at Scoop News Group, Fed Scoop. Can we get Billy on? There he is. We're going to get his mute. There you go. How are you doing today, Billy?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thanks for having me. And as I always like to say, go Hokies.
I was going to say the same thing. We stole my thunder, so I don't know what to say now. Yes, Billy is a Hokie. I was actually, when I was at Virginia Tech, I was a sports editor of the college paper, and then that was the last of my journal. I had a lot of fun with it actually, but it was I still think I'm a journalist sometimes, but I'm not. We got the professionals over at FedScoop doing it, and
Thanks.
Billy is must follow, and you manage a group of really fine reporters, and you really are doing this community service. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. And I also got my start at the Collegiate Times as well, so we have that too. Yeah, good times. Cool. Well, thanks, Tom, and I'll take it from here and start to introduce the great panelists. I'm really excited to talk about the topic of cybersecurity. So what I'll do is go through and introduce each of these gentlemen, and then I'll give them a couple minutes after that to give some opening thoughts and introduce themselves in a little bit more depth. Starting off, we have Vincent Sritapan, who is the Cyber QSMO or QSMO Section Chief for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. We also have Greg Crabb, Chief Information Security Officer and Digital Solutions Vice President at the U.S. Postal Service. Marvin Woods, Electrical Engineer for the Federal Aviation Administration. And last but not least, Frank Brigulio, sorry about that, Global Public Sector Strategist for SailPoint. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. And like I said, I think it's a good time to go back through and let each of you sort of give your opening statements on sort of the evolving topic of cybersecurity, what's new in this current environment, obviously a lot going on, and sort of what you do in each of your roles. So we'll go back through the same order I just introduced everyone. So let's start with you, Vincent.
Hi, thanks, Billy. Thanks for having me. My name is Vincent Sritapan. I work for CISO, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. Some of the things we're working on are sort of why I came over to CISA actually is to support a lot of the mobile security shared services across CISA, but more importantly within the Cyber Quality Service Management Office. So one of my hats is actually looking at this as a shared service, as a capability of which we can help protect federal departments and agencies, protect federal networks. Another hat that I do have sort of working in this capacity is, also connecting with the federal community is I co-chair the Federal Mobility Group. It's chartered under the Fed CIO Council, Fed CISO Council. Mr. Nick Ward at the DOJ CISO is our executive sponsor. We have other co-chairs from NIST, Jem O'Howell and Jim Russo from GSA. In our group, we have about 45 departments and agencies working on, common shared problems within the mobile space, right? Cybersecurity and otherwise, acquisitions, 5G and others. So in that vein, in that hat, lots to talk about, but we have a lot of efforts going on, things that are looked to be delivered within this quarter and the next quarter. And I can talk more about those, but everything from things like international travel guidance to, 5G R&D efforts that are actually being tested across. And the other part of that I actually do have just working forward is working Ciso's 5G R&D efforts. So we have that partnership with DHS Science and Technology. It's actually where I came from before this stint here. And they have a broad agency announcement in secure and resilient mobile network infrastructure. So if you're interested in any of the mobile 5G cybersecurity efforts, I've really brought here to work those things overall. As far as in the future and what I see, I will say just a couple tip points. I know we're going to go Q&A and other people. So I would note that there is 5G technology, right, being deployed today. It's really it's a non-standalone solution set, really, on the 5G on the radio access network and a 4G core. When we think about in the future emerging technologies that are brought by non-standalone, right, the mobile access edge compute, think about how all those use cases, right, great for public safety, great for our various missions in agriculture and others, law enforcement, but how do we secure that? How do we bring security and cybersecurity to help enable those types of things? Those are things that we're looking at, we're focusing on, and I can talk more as we go through. But I'll go ahead and stop there and go ahead, next person.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, let's pass it over to Greg Crabb at USPS.
Thanks, Billy, and good afternoon, all. Greg Crabb. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at the United States Postal Service. I have a very unusual hat that I wear. I'm a 25-year law enforcement veteran, and for the last 5 years have served in the role of Chief Information Security Officer for the Postal Service. We have done a lot in the last year relative to protecting the information assets of the Postal Service and making them available to deliver on our essential services to respond as well as the Postal Service has through the pandemic. And then obviously the election was near and dear to our hearts, protecting over 80 million outbound ballots and 65 million inbound ballots for the nation. My core mission is to protect all of those information assets and all the technology that's necessary in order for consumers and citizens to interact with the Postal Service, as well as move all of the mail that's necessary. And it really is focusing on the fundamentals of people, process, and technology. And I look forward to engaging in this community around some of those things from a process and technology perspective that we need to look forward to. Have some great projects in advanced analytics as it relates to identity and access management. Also have in the midst of the election, a patent in the area of vote by mail with blockchain technology was announced. Love to discuss those types of technologies that can provide more rapid voting, more stronger integration with mobile in order to be able to help our citizens accurately get their votes counted. So look forward to today's conversation. Thank you, Billy.
All right, great. Thanks, Greg. Let's move on to Marvin Woods of FAA.
Good afternoon. My name is Marvin Woods. I'm an electrical engineer for the Federal Aviation Administration. I've had the privilege of working for the FAA for about 4.5 years. Specifically, I'm an electrical engineer in the Office of Airports, one of several lines of business at the FAA that, as the name says, airports, we deal with the specifications, performance and otherwise for airports themselves. Our particular group, or my particular group, is infrastructure oriented. However, I'm sure as Mr. Dodd probably has alluded to, at this point, a light bulb is no longer just a light bulb. A fuse is no longer just a fuse. These things are becoming networked. They're becoming addressable, and they are, to some extent, becoming intelligent. They have some type of processing capability. So we're trying to be proactive as this evolution in technology is deployed into the airfield. That's part of why I've been participating with ATARC. It's been very, very informative, and with working with our other lines of business, again, to try to be proactive about evaluating cyber threats, cyber risks. And in getting involved in all this, I just want to emphasize, even if this is not your background, if you're not from a hard programming or hard IT background, the exchange of information, the communication with your peers is important. You have a perspective that they don't have, and they need it from you to help assess threats. And I'm interested in hearing what everything else this great panel is going to say.
Thank you, Marvin. And finally, let's go over to Frank at SailPoint.
Thank you, Billy. Excuse me. My name's Frank Piglio. I think some of you may have recognized me from my earlier session that I did addressing cybersecurity challenges with identity-centric security. There's a lot to unpack there during that session, so I hope we get a chance to kind of dig a little deeper in kind of that same line. But with that said, you know, I recently celebrated my 28th wedding anniversary, and while doing so, I was reflecting on my journey through my career during this time in identity and access management within the federal government. And I started this journey in the mid-90s at Netscape in the boom of the .com era as an identity and PKI architect after leaving 10 years in the Navy. Since then, I spent some time at Sun Microsystems, Microsoft, Oracle, Deloitte, and many others, and working on some key government initiatives, HSPD 12, e-authentication, identity, credentialing, and access management. Literally worked on the roadmap when it was drafted across the department, the IC, and the cabinet agencies. And most recently, I've been heavily involved as an ICAM SME with the CDM program, defining the next generation of IDAM in DoD. And now doing some work with the NIST Cybersecurity Center of Excellence for Zero Trust. So, you know, along with similar activities across global governments, we've come a long way with identity in the federal government. But, you know, I think it's time to reflect that this is a journey. It's not a destination. We need to look at some new security models, such things like Zero Trust, new technologies such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, that's going to make our environments more secure. We're following more guidelines, standards, privacy laws to protect our citizens and the keys to the nation's, you know, most sensitive assets. With that, I'm honored to be here today and look forward to this great discussion with this great group of panel and government experts. Thanks, Billy.
Absolutely, thank you. So what we're going to do now, we're going to open it up to my Q&A, but what we would like to do is invite everyone who is watching today to also submit questions. We'll be watching and happy to ask those on the panel. But to start off, I'll kind of go through my own questions and then start to check my tally to see if anybody sends any in. But let's start with a really broad question. And I think it's sort of something, you know, we talk about IT a lot, we talk about cybersecurity a lot, this is what we live and breathe, but we kind of take it for granted or maybe overlook this point. And it is, you know, in today's federal IT environment, what does it mean to strengthen your cybersecurity? I think it's something we all think we know, but it's definitely evolved. So I'd like to start there and sort of define that for this conversation and hear from each of you what it means to strengthen an agency cybersecurity and what exactly that looks like. So maybe we'll start again with Vincent, since I know you take a broader look at this at your within your role at CISA, and then we can dive into some of the weeds with the guys at FAA, USPS, and then Frank's perspective at SailPoint.
Yeah, so as far as you know, strengthening the department, or you know, CISA, in our case, our broader view of, you know, federal networks, we have to take a look at, you know, what is the attack surface, you know, what assets do we have, what's the value, and you know, what would the adversary do? In our cases, we do have a lot of efforts around GovCar, so cybersecurity architecture review, where we do look at that. It drives a lot of our investments and our decisions on what do we want to push forward with. I mean, of course, you know, with CISA, we have the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation program. That is a huge effort that's underway. The some things that I'll mention, and it's more from a, you know, think of it as a try not to a macro view, but as an agency, individual agency, as you look at that. I think given the circumstances and the times, and more towards COVID impacts and what that means to a department or agency, I think that people's view on acceptability of, how people work, right? Where they're working from, what their mobile asset, and laptop asset, really means to the agency. How do we secure those endpoints? Because I think with the whole telework, we did put out different types of telework guidance. It really changed the way people provision services, secure services, and really enable their workforce, because it's not the I'm coming in 9 to 5 to the office anymore, right? It is the new norm of telework for our folks today, and how we accommodate having to transit into a skiff to do certain work. But today, and how we do cybersecurity, really the paradigm has shifted. So I think it has drawn people to look at things like Trusted Internet Connection 3.0. We have the remote user use cases out there today, out for comment until the end of the month on 29th. So, I welcome folks to take a look at that. But people are taking a look at understanding what their use cases are, because they've changed, right? With COVID and the impact that has changed. The tools that we have today, you may see, just progression of, we used to have Microsoft Teams, like we're on Zoom now, or whatever platform is your preference, right? No preference on this side. But what I would say is that things like, well, I need to make sure I have a dial-in number, right? I need to make sure I have enough subscriber services lines available so I can have enough people in the room. We would have, initially, we had issues of, well, too many people on a call, or too many people in the video, or no dial-in for the video teleconference, video conferencing. So you'll see those types of things, and even with well, is it password protected? Is it open to everyone? Those types of things that have changed how we look at cybersecurity today. And I'm really giving you a short-term look, but I do think just understanding the impacts of COVID, understanding how we work today, cybersecurity paradigm has shifted, and how we provision services. Even in my Navy, so I'm also a Navy reservist as a lieutenant. And I'll say that, in the DoD CVR environment, what they're willing to accept, how we operate, and what we're able to put, FOU or CUI data, there's a lot of difference today than maybe you talk about our appetite before March, right? And what we were willing to put online. So understanding, we've changed with the times, we're trying our best to secure things, but understanding that we still need to continue our mission. So I'll go ahead and stop there and turn it over to Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. I think as we see, this modernization and move to enhance the security of our agencies, one of the things about the CDM program that's really impressed me is it's given the agencies data and visibility that's critical in increasing the cybersecurity posture. And Kevin Cox mentioned it this morning about operationalizing the data. Excuse me, it's late in the afternoon. And this is critical, and this can be done in a lot of the access methodologies that we have and that we're intending to use in the future. But really taking some of that data we now know about our assets, that we now know about our systems and data, and most importantly, our users, and place the right controls around it to enable things like the remote worker, and disable the access that we grant that remote worker when that access is no longer necessary. Over my 20-something years, I've been doing identity and security in the government. One of the things that we see is this huge identity debt. And every agency has it, and it's a result of people transferring, contractors, shifting of jobs and entitlements, responsibilities. We don't remove that, and that leaves us with this exposure. So I think as we look towards what's next in modernizing and what security should mean to the agencies, is really taking a look at some of that debt that we have left behind, and removing that debt to get us back to an even playing field with our adversaries when it comes to the identity itself, the things that's being used against us in these breaches.
Thanks, Frank. And I like where this conversation's going. We're talking a lot about, this new normal within the pandemic, which is sort of where I want to go. I'd love to pass it over to Greg, though, because you mentioned something in your opening remarks about, this unprecedented voting and sending ballots to and from via the mail, and how that plays into the role of cybersecurity. So I'd love to hear how that's kind of a new evolving paradigm within this, realm of cybersecurity as well.
Sure, absolutely. Great conversation, gentlemen. And to build off of what Frank kind of started, it's really that intersection of people, process, and technology. And Frank was talking about some of those breakdowns in process relative to, for example, removing employees or what have you. When you really look at the relationship that the Postal Service has with the community and with citizens, we're in a very unique spot. And we have a lot of technology that is on the street. And how do we leverage that technology in order to be able to support stronger identity practices and couple that with a mail piece? And we've got almost 18,000 plus or minus election authorities within the United States. The Postal Service is a unique provider to all of those election authorities. And we promulgate requirements on how a mail piece should be designed, but it's up to the election authority to decide whether to design it with a barcode so that we can tell you that it was actually received by the election authority. That is a form of information and connection to the citizen that's extremely important. And when I can't let a citizen know that a mail piece that contained their ballot was received by the election authority, that's a very significant failure in the management of information and the connection with the citizen. So we have a long way to go as it relates to improving not only the ability for our citizens to vote, but when you look around the economy and you hear about things like unemployment fraud and the types of schemes that are going on in society relative to those that are trying to take advantage of systems that have been put in place to be able to help those that are hurting. We have a responsibility, I think, from a government perspective to improve how we interact with our communities and providing that visibility. Yesterday, we had an all-time high. We provide a product that allows consumers to know that their mail piece is arriving in their mailbox. We had 325,000 consumers sign up for a product called Informed Delivery so that they could view their images of their mail pieces coming to their house that contains that stimulus check. And those are important interactions for us to provide greater visibility to citizens. And I think we need to continue to integrate those people, process, and technology components as we move forward. And if the conversation takes us there, I'd love to talk more about this concept of using blockchain and physical mail to be able to provide a quicker, more citizen visibility on the vote, as well as improving election authorities' performance from a vote and citizen assurance perspective.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, that was a great foundation. I think a really important example of how something that you wouldn't typically lump under the IT side of cybersecurity plays an important role in this landscape. Let's wrap up this initial question with Marvin, because I know, the way that FAA looks into aviation cybersecurity is an incredibly important part of that as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts to start this conversation. Then we can get back into some of the emerging technologies that Greg just mentioned, such as blockchain.
Okay. I'm going to focus a little bit on the people aspect of it. as I've been getting involved in this, the cyber security aspect of infrastructure protection and infrastructure resiliency, I do think there needs to be an emphasis on, I'll say, culture. Cybersecurity has to be equivalent to physical security in the thinking in the workplace. They have to be equivalent. Cybersecurity has to be equivalent to your physical security. And also, I think through positive reinforcement, we need to encourage people to let them know, yeah, you're looking at that data, and it's the same data to you that you look at every day, but that data is valuable. Somebody wants it, both for good and for bad reasons. So we need to encourage people to be positive about, no matter where you are in your organization. If you manage data, you are an important part of cybersecurity. I think that has to be reinforced. And also, I think we think of cybersecurity as this, due to pop culture, maybe as sort of a science fiction thing. Like, okay, yeah, that's a threat, but it's a threat someday in the future. Well, yeah, and the future could be tomorrow. The future could be 5 years from now. The future could be 24 months from now. Well, we don't know. All we know is that we have to be ready. So let's start the discussions and let's implement the practices we need to do, or we need to implement for that day when whatever that threat or risk may be. And I'll leave it at that so we can get further along in our discussion.
Great, thanks, Marvin. Yeah, so I like to turn back sort of to the direction Greg was going with how emerging tech plays into this and ties into the cybersecurity and advances it. So I think, we could maybe pass it to Greg for the blockchain example, but I do want to hear from everyone else after that, because obviously there's a plethora of emerging tech that really strengthens this new normal of cybersecurity that we're sort of alluding to in this conversation.
Actually, I want to build off of what Marvin was saying. This physical to digital convergence with technologies like 5G that provides greater localization, greater ability for us as government and for industry to be able to localize content is significant. And I think that there are excellent examples as it relates to what happened last week, where we had a physical event that was precipitated by a social media organization, right? The mob organized around social media. It ends up at the national capital, and I think that the nation's capital, and I think that those are excellent examples of how this digital to physical convergence really is being actualized. And when you look at the election and what the Postal Service did to support the election officials around the United States, we need to provide greater visibility to decision makers, whether those decision makers are election authorities or whether the decision makers are the Capitol Police, in order to be able to make good informed decisions on how to protect our citizens and to give the citizens assurance that everything is true and accurate. So the Postal Service about 18 months ago started a project to marry physical mail ballots, mobile, and blockchain in order to be able to figure out how do we give you as the consumer the ability to know that your vote was counted, to be able to vote via your mobile device, but also to provide that election authority, not only the physical ballot, because you return the physical ballot, but also the electronic count. And so leveraging the blockchain, leveraging mobile technology in order to be able to take the physical ballot, make your selection on your physical ballot, take an image of that, send this physical ballot, as well as having the blockchain evidence, I think are excellent examples of kind of that physical to digital convergence that Marvin was pointing to as we drive forward here, because I think it's going to be a long time before election authorities are going to be comfortable with anything but having the physical ballot in hand. But in the same regard, you as a citizen need to have the assurance that your transaction was fair and completely represented in the course of the election as well. So that's just one project that we're working on that I think points to how other organizations may want to consider this physical to digital convergence. And you know, I think as we talk about where 5G takes us relative to the localization and knowing where that vote was counted, or IoT and being able to understand the performance of whether it's a vote counting machine, those are all important processes that we need to have high visibility on from an integrity perspective.
That's great. So we heard blockchain. You alluded to 5G. What others are out there, or does anybody want to sound off on some of the same ones that Greg just mentioned?
So I can talk, since we mentioned 5G and mobile. It's a good slip in. I'll note that definitely from an emerging technology in federal cyberspace or cybersecurity space, you really think about in the mobile space, there's two parts, right? There's the 5G part, and I'll talk more about that and sort of where we're going and what we're doing. But the other aspect, when you say like a mobile app to do voting, and I'm not a voting expert and by any stretch of that, but I do know mobile application security, right? And some of the sort of the OWASP top 10, the NIAP protection profile that we have for mobile app vetting, different things that are best practices out there. And so what I'd note is, traditional enterprise mobile security best practices, whether it's developing mobile applications, whether it's provisioning devices, hardening devices, all of that, even if you move to things like mobile threat defense and EDR type solutions, all of those are still foundational. Those are still important. Note that they are distinctly different in the mobile environment as far as like what you can do on a specific mobile operating system versus another. It's not the same thing to just say, oh, well, it's Windows or it's, an OS X or whatever the operating system on a desktop. They function different, right? The architecture is different, isolation is different, how that's done. So just keep those types of things in mind as you look at that. I would say the future, the short-term pieces, and you can go look at NIST 800-124 revision 2 when we talk about enterprise mobile security and how that should be done. We are looking to finalize that. Some of the NIST authors, and I happen to contribute to one of those, is coming out in the coming months. What I would say from the 5G side of the house, right? And you talk about all these great things, but they're going to ride over something, right? And 4G today, or a Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi network connection. When we move to the 5G side of the house, what I can say is that we're looking at things that are important to federal cyberspace as we move forward. Is if you think about 5G today, and it's still developing, right? I mentioned that earlier. There are 3GPP standards, international standards that are occurring, right? I understand that security for telecommunications is definitely, you look at CISRIC and what FCC is doing, all great things, all things that are there. But notably that security is not required for telecommunications. Even if it's built into their standards, it's up to the carrier to implement them, which is, we definitely hope they're doing so. But you got to keep in mind, even if they put everything on there, one of the things we're looking to test out in some of our efforts in a sort of a 5G lab as a service is take your builds, right, end-to-end architecture. Let's throw on everything that 3GPP and probably in release 15, it would get to 16, when those are available in adoption today, and then throw on a layer of all the security products people are talking about. And is there still a gap, right? How does that impact our ability to do mission, right? We care about voice and data and ensuring confidentiality, integrity, availability of that call. But we have to understand that the technology as it develops, it either is going to make it more secure, which is inherently more secure, but are all those features turned on, or are we bringing in new vulnerabilities, right? With the idea of now everything is, you think of network slicing as a great opportunity. Everything is virtualized, but at the same time, does that present new problems for you? So I think going forward, there's a lot of work to be done in cybersecurity and emerging technology. You just have to think about which part of it. In the mobile space, there's the enterprise mobile security, a lot of what's known today. And then as we move to 5G and beyond, we'll bring new use cases to do new missions. And we have to figure out how to secure that, working with industry in that partnership.
Great. And I think, Marvin, you were about to answer as well, so I'll pass it your way next.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in. Greg referenced IoT, Internet of Things. The asset management and savings potential of IoT, we can't even imagine it. But again, to counter that, that also may lead to an opportunity. It's another potential vulnerability. But we don't think about it. We don't think about there being a sensor in a door and what that means, both good and bad, or sensors in a window, or even sensors in concrete. But in terms of being stewards, I'll speak from federal employees' perspective, in terms of being stewards of our national resources and infrastructure, the savings opportunity is tremendous in terms of being able to manage these assets, track their life expectancy, coordinate maintenance. It's great. But also for people with, we say malicious intent because that would be an issue too, but also I'll speak to, let's say like our procurement agents, our procurement people. Maybe you're buying something. Maybe, you're just, as far as you know, like I said, you're just buying a light bulb. So maybe there's a specification for a light bulb. So someone bids and, their bid meets the specification, good price. But is this light bulb, is it addressable? Does it have some type of processing intelligence on it? Or can it be upgraded with some type of module? Okay, I'm just using this as a abstract example. So we need you to think about that, not just what you're asking for, but what else does it impact? So again, we're gonna have to kind of expand our thinking about this, but I think IoT, really a lot of positive potential there, but we just have to stay on top of it.
That's great, thanks Marvin. And then I'll let Frank have the closing thought on the emerging tech side of things.
Yeah, I think, I mentioned it before. I think what we're seeing a lot of, is this emergence of tools based on artificial intelligence and machine learning in IoT, in analytics, across the board as an enabler, but it's also introducing risk. And I think we just need to wrap our arms around the things we're letting touch our networks, no matter what they are, and have the controls and visibility of that. So I think, as far as an emergence of where tools and technologies are going, in this space, I think artificial intelligence, machine learning is something that, we'll continue to grapple with as an enabler and as a risk in our environment.
All right. I think we probably have time for one last question before we wrap up, but I do know that the folks at ATARC wanted to throw out a poll, so I'll give them the opportunity to do that while I kind of compose my thoughts for the last question. All right, well, I hope that's enough time. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. There's the poll results. So it looks like a lot of people are still working towards embracing the new normal, but still have a lot of work to get there. So glad we had this conversation today about the new normal. Let's close out. We've talked a lot about people, process, and technology. We haven't talked much about the strategy and policy side of things. So as we get to this place of new normal, how is strategy playing a role? How is policy playing a role? That sort of behind the scenes backbone of all of this outside of the technology side of things. And I realize we have, probably 5 or 6 minutes to get through this question. So if everybody wants to sort of give their quick download, we'll start. Let's start with Frank and go backwards from there and wrap up with Vince.
Yeah, I think, as far as policy is concerned, we look at, the new zero trust policy. Vincent mentioned the mobile device policies. There's so much going on that we need to keep focus on and keep moving forward with. And really, going back to that comment I made about identity DNA or identity debt, we need to continue to monitor these new policies and standards, even around privacy, and really take stock in the things that we have today, the tools that we have, and leverage those moving forward. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you for the brevity. Let's go to Marvin, then to Greg, and then let Vince wrap it up at the end.
Briefly, again, I'm just gonna make one comment. As far as maybe, again, I want to emphasize, maybe if you're not coming from a hard IT or a hard technical background, this is where we need you. We need our policy people. We need our philosophers. We need our creative thinkers, the engineers, the geeks, the nerds. We can give you the nuts and bolts, but we're gonna need some vision, I guess. It may sound cliche, but we're gonna need vision in crafting policy to the technology.
And from the Postal Service perspective, we're excited to see what was announced in December relative to the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020. And I think looking at that as a guide on how agencies need to address IoT and the policy aspects of those, it's extremely important for my organization as we look to improve IoT implementation in vehicles and facilities. We want to help communities be smarter in their city, in their smart cities approach. So we're looking at those foundations in that act to be able to help us set a path so that we can secure IoT. And I'll leave it at that, handing it back to Vincent there.
Great. So just wrapping up, I'll note for, in general, mobile security for departments and agencies, as we look at this, I mean, I definitely say stick to the basics, right? There are hardware, software, asset management. How do we secure those endpoints? How do we manage access? All those are just from a short-term strategy, you want to get your house in order, right? It makes sense. Long-term and sort of a broader set, and it's more for the US as the corporate good. I will say that if you look at the national strategy to secure 5G efforts, there's a lot there going on there. The implementation plan has been rolling. CISA, if you go to cisa.gov/5G, just putting in a plug, you will see that we do have 5 strategic initiatives. I don't want to go through all of them because that would take too long, but things to note that there are strategic efforts and initiatives going on. There are implementation plan activities going on. If you're not following what we're doing, you're following what DoD is doing and others. There's a lot there that the reason why we want to advance prototyping and adoption quickly and also make sure that it's secure is so that if we can test 5G and all the various use cases, mission applications faster, we'll have that economic advancement and advantage for our nation. So I'll start there.
All righty, great. Once again, I wanted to thank everybody. I'll go around the video that I can see. Frank Berguglio from SailPoint, Greg Crabb, USPS, Vince Furpan at CISA, and Marvin Woods at FAA. It's been great chatting with you gentlemen today. I think it was a great conversation, and I'll pass it back to Tom.
Thanks, Billy. Well done. Everybody clap. This was a good one. Thank you very much for that. I learned a lot. Good to see you all, and everybody have a good day. And thank you for that, Billy. And that wraps it up. That was the fastest 2 hours and 15 minutes or 2.5 hours I think I've had in a while. But we've got a lot going on. For those of you not in the federal government, we've got a virtual sales summit tomorrow. It should be really, really good. We've got 3 companies. We've got the VPs of federal of them, and they're just going to talk about doing sales in a pandemic. How do I interface with the government folks, and how do I keep the work going on and keep our businesses moving? So that's one we're going to do like once a year. So that's going to be a real key event. And then later that day, we've got an agency spotlight event with GSA, Dave Scheib and his team talking about digital transformation. It's a panel. Should be really, really good. It's basically on everything that GSA IT is doing these days. And then, boy, one of the themes of 2020 and going into 21, leveraging TIC 3.0 to secure a mobile government workforce. So that's going to be on Thursday. And we'll get this out to you. We'll also get out all of your the presentations that we can. And thank you for your attention and sticking around. And I think a lot of you watch the whole thing, so we appreciate that. We hopefully you got a lot out of it. But anyway, have a good rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.